Welcome back to the Silent Report. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on a quiet revolution that has reshaped war, politics, and power in the 21st century, a revolution you see in headlines but rarely understand in its true, corrosive form. This is the story of the new mercenaries, private military contractors, shadow armies hired by corporations and states, and the invisible thread that ties boardrooms to battlefields. It is a story of money, plausible deniability, and the erosion of accountability, a story the powerful prefer to keep off the record. Once upon a time, war had faces you could name: generals, ministers, and soldiers whose uniforms and flags made responsibility obvious. Today, conflicts increasingly involve actors with no flag at all. They fly under commercial insurance, billable hours, and non-disclosure agreements. They are contractors, subcontractors, shell companies, and, at times, entire military services outsourced to the highest bidder. The contracts are obscured, the rules rewritten, and the human cost, for local populations and for democracies, is paid in silence. To understand this new world, follow the money. When governments face budget limitations, political constraints, or PR risk, they find it expedient to outsource. Need air support but want no official casualties? Hire a private firm. Need intelligence and deniability? Engage private analysts and former intelligence officers. Need a force to secure a pipeline or a mine in a faraway country, but don't want tanks parading under your flag? Pay a contractor and sign them as security on paper. Corporations, too, discover an irresistible calculus: pay for bespoke force projection and legalize distance from controversy. The result is a marketplace for force, tailored, on demand, and remarkably opaque. These firms market themselves carefully. Sleek websites show disciplined men training in deserts and forests, mission statements about protecting assets and personnel, and slick logos that look like Fortune 500 subsidiaries. They promise specialized skills: close protection, logistics, intelligence gathering, aerial surveillance, electronic warfare. They use the language of risk management and continuity planning. Replace troops with operators and battle with mission, and you have a sanitized brochure that conceals an industry that now moves billions across borders with minimal oversight. How did we get here? The story accelerates at the end of the Cold War. With standing armies shrinking and complex conflicts emerging, insurgencies, counterterrorism, corporations expanding into fragile states, a vacuum opened. States no longer wanted the political cost of deploying uniformed soldiers, they wanted flexible, contractable forces. Private companies filled the gap. Early pioneers performed logistical and support roles. Then, as wars in Afghanistan and Iraq demonstrated, contractors moved into frontline duties: convoy protection, interrogation support, base defense, and even direct combat in some theaters. The bureaucracies that once monitored warfare quickly found themselves outsourcing not only labor but judgment. This industry's growth is not an accident, it is encouraged by law and policy shaped to create room for private action. Governments signed contracts written to limit liability, to classify information, and to treat disputes in closed tribunals. Accountability became a patchwork: military codes, corporate accountability standards that vary by jurisdiction, and occasional domestic prosecutions that are costly and politically fraught. International law struggles to keep pace. When an incident occurs, a civilian casualty, an unlawful detention, or a covert operation gone wrong, responsibility can become a labyrinth. Who ordered the mission? Which company provided the personnel? Which nation signed the contract? In the spaces between, victims are left without recourse. The human dimension of this system is neglected in official narratives. Many contractors are ex-soldiers, veterans whose battlefield experience is monetized by companies that promise good pay and a continuation of the mission culture. For some, it's a practical transition from uniformed service to civilian life. For others, it is a dangerous slide toward a commodified war ethic where profit and engagement are measured in missions rather than laws of armed conflict. The psychological toll is profound. Operators face risks no insurance can fully cover: trauma, moral injury, and the knowledge that when something goes wrong, they are more likely to have a legal team than a public apology. Local populations see foreign uniforms replaced by neutral-colored vests and sunglasses. The alienation is total. Consider the theaters where this industry thrives. Fragile states with weak institutions, rich in natural resources or strategically located, become magnet zones. Corporations need security to extract value, governments need security to maintain order, private firms step in and profit. Often, what begins as asset protection morphs into gatekeeping power, access to land, control over checkpoints, influence over local politics. When contractors coordinate with local militias, or when they subcontract to locally recruited forces who answer to them more than the state, the local power balance changes. Long-term governance and sovereignty are quietly traded for short-term stability contracts. There are moments when the veneer slips. A carefully worded incident report becomes leaked emails, witness testimony, and images that travel the web. In those moments, the industry's darkest features are exposed. Extrajudicial killings, black sites, coerced intelligence, and whole operations run with questionable legal authority. But such revelations rarely lead to structural reform. Investigations are slow, evidence disappears, and the political appetite to regulate an industry that services national strategic needs is thin. There is a reflexive acceptance. We relied on them, therefore we must keep them close. Profit motives further complicate the moral calculus. Companies answer to shareholders and seek contracts that are profitable even when they are risky. Their incentive is not to prevent conflict, but to provide instruments for it. Training, equipment, and operational tempo can be scaled as long as budgets flow. When wars are profitable, there is a risk, a real, structural risk, that private incentives will encourage extension of campaigns, lobbying for policies that sustain demand, and creative redefinition of security to perpetuate business. The market for violence, once limited to the state, now has players whose fiduciary duty is growth. Then there's the legal sanctuary industry has created for itself. Jurisdictional gymnastics shield contractors. An employee hired in country A to work in country B for a company incorporated in country C can fall into a black hole of legal responsibility. Where courts can exercise oversight, governments sometimes sign indemnity clauses that immunize contractors from prosecution. The rationale is bureaucratic. Contractors need to operate under the legal protections that keep them working in dangerous places. But the legal shields created can easily become legal blindfolds, preventing victims from achieving remedy and allowing negligent or criminal behavior to fester. What about accountability? In some cases, contracts are accompanied by clauses promising oversight, audits, and adherence to codes of conduct. But these are only as robust as the institutions enforcing them. Independent monitoring is inconsistent, and whistleblowers face retaliation and non-disclosure agreements. When a company is deeply embedded in a theater, providing logistics, intelligence analysis, and private security, the border between contractor and state blurs. This is dangerous. Democratic oversight of force is a bedrock principle. Citizens authorize the use of public force through elected representatives. When private entities wield comparable power without the same transparency, democracy becomes less principled and more transactional. The story grows darker with the integration of technology. Private firms are not just providing boots on the ground anymore. They are offering aerial platforms, facial recognition datasets, algorithmic targeting tools, and cyber capabilities. This tech magnifies their reach. A private surveillance firm can aggregate satellite feeds, local camera networks, and social media signals, then sell actionable intelligence. That intelligence can be used to preempt dissent, target individuals, and influence outcomes, all through contractual agreements that are not subject to the same scrutiny as public programs. The weaponization of data, outside public law and oversight, creates a parallel architecture of control. The implications are global. When companies from wealthy nations deploy capabilities in poorer ones, the asymmetry of power is stark. Local sovereignty erodes, and the economic benefits of security contracts rarely translate into public service improvements. In some cases, local elites capture contracts and protections, deepening corruption and division. The international consequences ripple. Proxy conflicts become more complex. Accountability becomes internationalized and diffuse, legal norms fragment across borders. Yet, in the quiet hallways of power, many argue that private actors provide necessary flexibility. They say contractors are specialists, able to respond faster, innovate, and operate where public forces cannot. They point to efficiencies and the ability to scale up quickly in crises. This pragmatic argument has appeal. When a natural disaster strikes or when a government's capacity is overwhelmed, private logistics and security can save lives. The problem is not utility, it is governance. Utility without norms is dangerous. So where can reform begin? First, transparency must be non-negotiable. Contracts that involve the use of force or surveillance must be publicly accessible, with redactions only for clear national security needs and a compelling public interest test. Second, jurisdictions must be clarified. A clear legal framework should establish who has prosecutorial authority when alleged crimes occur. Third, independent oversight bodies with international reach should be empowered to audit, investigate, and enforce standards. Think of them as the public accounting firms of force, external, rigorous, and unafraid to publish findings. Fourth, corporate governance must change. Boards of directors must be accountable for companies that profit from force. Shareholders should insist on transparency and ethical risk reviews. Insurance underwriters who provide policies to these firms must demand compliance with human rights standards as a condition of coverage. When profitability depends on ethical compliance, incentives shift. Fifth, support systems for contractors must be addressed. Many of the people doing this work are veterans who joined private firms because they lack support at home. Reintegration programs, mental health care, and legal protections for whistleblowers are essential. We cannot separate the human cost from the structural problem. Finally, civil society and the press must reclaim the watchdog role. In an era of surveillance and information control, investigative journalism remains one of the few lights that can illuminate shadow contracts and illicit operations. When journalists and NGOs expose wrongdoing, public pressure follows, and sometimes law follows pressure. But that mechanism is fragile. It needs legal protections for reporters, open court access, and international collaboration because the firms and their operations are transnational. This system, private force for hire, is not going away. It is embedded in global finance, military doctrine, and corporate strategy. The question is whether we will let it evolve into an unregulated parallel system of authority, or whether we will build institutions that keep it accountable to the public it affects. The stakes are profound. The erosion of public sovereignty, the normalization of privatized coercion, and the fragmenting of legal responsibility. As you watch the brave men and women who wear vests and drive armored vehicles, remember, for every uniform, there is a backstory of contracts, legal clauses, and profit margins. For every mission, there is a chain of command that often ends in a corporate boardroom rather than a parliament. That is not to villainize every individual who makes a hard living in dangerous places. Many act with honor, professionalism, and courage. But systems are shaped by incentives, and incentives in this sector too often reward secrecy and expansion rather than restraint and accountability. We end with a question: what kind of world do we want to live in? One where violence is a public responsibility, debated, legislated, and accountable, or one where it becomes a service purchased by those with means, available to influence outcomes behind closed doors? If the latter becomes the norm, we risk a future where power is more private than public, where democracy is outsourced, and where the human cost of conflict is measured in silence. If this report resonates with you, if you care about the rule of law and the accountability of power, there are practical steps you can take. Support independent journalism that investigates contracts and covert operations. Push your elected representatives to demand transparency from public procurement. Back NGOs that litigate for victims' rights and that advocate for international norms governing private military activity. Reform starts with awareness, and awareness grows when people insist that light be shined on what prefers to stay dark. Thank you for watching and for keeping the questions alive. If you found this investigation valuable, share it widely, in private messages, on comment threads, and with players in your own community who can influence change. Our work here at The Silent Report is not entertainment, it is a call to remember that power, when left unchecked, seeks the quiet. We prefer a louder world. If you want more deep dives like this, subscribe and ring the bell. Tell us which shadow industry you want us to investigate next, and we'll dig until the records, the contracts, and the people who hide behind them have nowhere left to go. Until the next report, stay curious, stay vigilant, and never accept silence as an answer. The Silent Report.